Amanda from Pontes Books here with our last video for chapter 6 of The Prince and the Pauper, another fun fact. So today's fun fact relates to polyglots. So we'll talk about what a polyglot is if you're not familiar, or maybe you get a hint from my picture that I've included. So basically, the connection that this has to The Prince and the Pauper in chapter 6 is a part of the conversation where Lady Jane is talking to Edward, so actually Tom, but who she believes is Edward. And she says, "But bide thy time in patience. It will not be for long. Thou wilt yet be graced with learning like thy father, and make thy tongue master of as many languages as his, good my prince." So this is kind of one of my favorite parts of the book, because Tom, kind of forgetting for a second that he's supposed to be pretending to Edward, is like, my father, thinking about John Canty. And if you remember anything about John Canty in the story, he is certainly not someone who speaks multiple languages or is really educated. And so he says something about, like, my father doesn't speak any languages except for the language of the pigs. And then they're kind of startled because it sounds like he's talking about Henry VIII, and he has to step in and he's like, my malady. But essentially, what I wanted to look at is, do we have record of Henry VIII knowing multiple languages? If so, how many? And then just in general, more information about polyglots in the world. So first of all, what is a polyglot? Someone who speaks or writes several languages. So another term for this could be someone who's multilingual. You may be more familiar with the term bilingual. That's someone who speaks 2 languages. Trilingual would mean 3, and kind of beyond that, probably multilingual is probably mostly used. So that's what a polyglot means. So supposedly Henry VIII was one. So how many languages did Henry VIII speak? So from what I could find, supposedly he was able to speak 7, some better than others. So English, probably he knew the most. He also knew Latin fairly well, because he grew up in kind of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church did a lot of their masses all in Latin at that time. And so through that, and through kind of historic studies, he probably knew Latin fairly well. And so the other languages were French, Spanish, German, Italian, and Greek. So it was said that he probably used Latin for discussing some of the most important issues with Cardinal Wolsey, because English was seen as kind of improper to discuss official business. And then he also had 2 wives who were from other countries. And so Catherine of Aragon was actually Spanish. So she was pretty non-fluent in English when I guess she came over to marry him. So he probably has some Spanish to be able to communicate with her. And then same thing with Anne of Cleves. That was his 4th wife. She was German. So he probably knew a little bit of German and Spanish for those reasons, and probably just, being a diplomat, it's important to be able to communicate with other monarchs and things around the world. But also was probably able to speak a few of those other languages as well. So supposedly that's Henry VIII. So if we think about kind of a modern day context, who are the most accomplished polyglots that we know of? So Ziad Farah was born in Liberia, raised in Beirut, and actually lives in Brazil. And it was kind of hard to find information on him. And I think the Guinness World Records aren't as much of a thing anymore. But as of, I think it was 1998, he actually held the Guinness World Record for knowing the most languages. And some sources I saw said it was 58, and some said it was 59. And as far as I know, he's actually still alive today. Now, there have been some people who have tried to kind of refute this claim that he speaks all these languages. Really, with all of these people that I'm presenting, it's kind of like a controversial thing, because it depends on what your standard is for being fluent in a certain language, and it's hard to prove. So all of these are a little bit, I guess you could say, controversial, but this is what I kind of found. So he is kind of like the modern person, I guess you could say, that's known as being the most accomplished polyglot. But I'm sure that could be argued for sure. So then this guy, John Bowring, is kind of known as being the winner throughout all history. But again, we don't really have a way to prove it. So he was actually British and was the 4th governor of Hong Kong. And he claimed to know 200 languages and was able to speak 100. So he lived from 1792 to 1872. So he is definitely no longer living. And yeah, but he is probably known as like the ultimate polyglot. That's the highest number really that you see of anyone, but no way to necessarily prove it. And then we have this guy, Cardinal Giuseppe Gaspardo Mezzofanti. So he was Italian and was actually a leader in the Catholic Church, was a cardinal, and he was known for speaking more than 38 languages fluently. And he lived from 1774 to 1849. So if you do any research into this, you'll see probably some other names pop up as well, but those are kind of the ones that I saw pop up the most of people who are famous for speaking multiple languages. So then I just kind of wanted to look into what are some of the cognitive benefits and kind of the scientific benefits of being multilingual. So for a while, this was seen as being kind of like a negative, or some people look at that and they're like, oh, well, you speak these multiple languages, and so you must not be able to, I don't know, distinguish between them. You get confused, but there are actually a lot of benefits to being bilingual or multilingual. So listed here are some on one of the sites that I found, but there were numerous sites that listed, and some of them had most of these in common. But just in general, a better understanding of how language works. So I don't consider myself bilingual, but I do know a good amount of Spanish, and I will say a good chunk of English grammar that I now understand, I learned when I started learning Spanish. And the more languages you learn, the more that is true. Also, you have less mental decline in old age. So there have been actual studies that show people who suffer from, I don't know, things like strokes or just in general old age, that those connections that you formed from learning multiple languages actually help to keep those connections strong in your brain, more so than people who don't know multiple languages. It also is gives you a more efficient executive control system in your brain, greater cognitive flexibility and problem-solving skills, improvement in your learning abilities. So just learning in general improves by learning multiple languages. It actually changes the neurological processing. So those connections that your brain makes change when you know multiple languages. You have more rational decision-making skills, and just in general, a more perceptive understanding of the world. So you're able to notice errors around you just from knowing multiple languages. So those are all things that your brain just does automatically from learning another language. And it's also important to note that the majority of the world, probably over half of the population, I think it was, I forget what the exact percentages were, but it was like 60 to 70%, somewhere like pretty high of the world, people are multilingual. But especially in the English-speaking world, we see so many people that are just monolingual, speaking one language. I myself consider myself to be monolingual, though I know bits and pieces of other languages, enough to understand, like I said, Spanish. I can read it, can't really speak it very well. But it's something that is rare for people to only speak one language. So if you only speak one, maybe this will be your calling to get out, learn another language, help your brain, and hopefully you learn something new. Have a good rest of your day.